Well, we've opened the post bag for this week's Sky Cricket podcast. Lots of questions came in, which we'll deal with in due course as best we can. But quick reflection on some lively sport over the weekend. I assume, Nash, you enjoyed the FA Cup, did you?
I really was not expecting that, actually. I thought you were going to go to the women's game this morning, and I've got to talk about Man United 10, parking the bus, the great Man United, some of the great cup ties between United and Arsenal, and you got one of the greatest football teams of all time parking the bus at the Emirates and trying to get it to penalties and just scrambling over the line. We need a centre forward. Sign the forward, please, Arsenal. I guess you watched it.
I kind of slightly tuned in. It wasn't the most thrilling game, but happy, of course, to see my team go through. Women's Ashes, you mentioned, 2-0 down England now, and a bit of a kind of collapse today. And given the point system, got to hope that they can get it through to the Test match with the series still alive. Australia looks stronger, don't they?
They do look stronger. I mean, England came back last time in the Ashes, but they got a mountain to climb now away from home. Why do they look stronger? Well, they've been stronger for a long time in world cricket. I know they had a poor T20 World Cup in the UAE, but in general, they look the strongest side. There's so much depth within the side. So you look at the middle order, who hasn't actually fired. They haven't actually played their best in these two games.
That's the point. They're not
No.
at their best yet.
Yeah. But they've got the likes of, Sutherland, Gardner, McGrath in that middle order, but also, out of the side, a young Georgia Vole who can't get in the side. So there's just so much depth to their team and their cricket. And I always feel with England, there isn't quite yet that depth, and that Siva Brunt, if she fires, if Eccleston fires, they've got a good chance. They were a bit clumsy today as well. They weren't overly cricket smart. I woke up early and watched the end of that game, and they made some errors. So if you're going to beat Australia, you can't afford that. Hopefully, if you're an England fan, they can bounce back.
The other bit of news as well was the PSL draft, which is an interesting one because there's a couple of players there, James Vince and Tom Kohler-Cadmore, who are on multi-format contracts with their counties, and the recent ECB policy on no objection certificates might mean that they have to step away from red ball cricket and go to a white ball contract only, which you can see why the ECB is trying to protect elements of the English game, but they may have unforeseen consequences or unintended consequences of pushing people away from first class cricket. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I was in at Essex a few days ago, last week, actually. I was doing something with the Essex women's team there. They asked me to go in, and they were talking about the Vince situations, sort of ramifications because he is, he's not just a white ball specialist. He's a very, very fine red ball player, and he's captain of the club, and he has been there churning out runs for them for a very long time. I guess he's coming towards the end of his professional career. So if there are, 100 grand offer on the table from the PSL, he may go just as a freelance. I will do what I can. I will play white ball cricket.
In microcosm, though, it's really the issue that is facing the game when private money comes in, and suddenly the incentives are so different between one part of the game, i.e., English county cricket, and another part of the game. That's going to have massive implications for player.
Do you not think like the West Indies and South Africa and even New Zealand and sides like that again? Welcome to our world. Over the last, we're now just catching up that they've come into our summer. We're going to have the American franchise in the middle of the summer as well. It is just that battle between white ball franchise cricket and red ball cricket. Red ball cricket costs a lot to put on. Even at county level, you have to have a second team. You have to have youth development sides and whatever. So it is a real critical point in where the balance between red ball cricket and white ball cricket is at the moment. You're right.
Well, we'll see how that plays out. As I say, we opened the post box or the.
Was that because you run out of ideas? Was it?
Possibly. Actually, the instruction came from our production coordinator, didn't it, this week, to to open the mailbag.
Right, what have they hit us with? What have our
Okay,
six
so
listeners hit us
first
with?
question, I'm going to go to a lady called Helen Eccles because she's been a long time commenter on cricket, particularly in pieces that I write. She's a very empathetic and smart lady. So I'm going to give her the first question. She said, there's lots of chat about saving Test cricket. In an ideal world, what does Test cricket look like in 20 years' time? And what state do you think it will actually be in by then? And second part to the question, you can invite anyone, living or dead, connected to the game onto the pod. Who would you ask?
Well, how would I like Test match cricket to be? I quite like it to be how it's gone in the last year. We had Graham Smith on last week, and I said to him, I can't understand the sort of anomaly between how interesting and fascinating people of my age, the world, my son, has found Test match cricket over the last year. There have been some magnificent stories. The Shamar Joseph story, maybe a bit more than a year now. The Gabba win, Sri Lanka resurgence. South Africa winning 7 on the bounce and heading the World Test Championship. And then obviously the way England have played, the way New Zealand have gone to India, the India-Australia series, I found it fascinating. And yet people keep telling us that it's not what people want to see, and it's not what people want to watch, and it's not the future. I can't marry those two things together in my head. Maybe those people know. What I don't like is people sort of pushing the narrative of that's dead, move on, we're going in a different direction, we're going down white ball, we're going down franchise. Because if in 20 years' time it is just white ball cricket and franchise cricket, I would find that so dull. How do I think it will be? It may well be 6 teams. Graham Smith himself said that he doesn't see maybe a future for some of the nations with the finances and the amount it costs to put Test matches on. It may be that. It will be there. I've been hearing about the death of Test match cricket for as long as I've been around, really. Who would I like on the pod? Well, he's sadly not with us anymore, but probably Shane. One final chat with Shane. I mean, he was the greatest cricketer I ever played against. But more than that, Shane, the person, when you walked into a room with Shane, everyone's eyes went on Shane. He had such charisma and aura about him on and off the cricket field. And he was great, great company. So we both miss Shane deeply. It would be lovely just to have one of those silly chats with Shane for 5 minutes. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been pessimistic about the future of Test cricket ever since, the advent of the market into the game, I suppose around about 2008. And for the reasons that we just mentioned with the PSL and James Vince, all the incentives are going to push players away from first class and red ball cricket. So fundamentally, I'm pessimistic about the prospects for first class and Test cricket down the line. I hope I'm wrong, obviously, because I love Test cricket. I like first class cricket. In terms of in an ideal world, what does Test cricket look like? I think it's down to in stadia crowds. You can't have a situation, as you often get, say in West Indies in the Caribbean, where there is two people watching a Test match. There's no future for a game if nobody's in the ground watching, and that's why I get frustrated with, for example, some of the stadiums in the Caribbean. They've gone to these huge stadiums now, in countries with small populations, whereas really the model should be what's happening in New Zealand with the boutique grounds. You might only have a capacity of, say, 7,000 as they do at the Basin Reserve, but 7,000 people in the Basin Reserve or the Hagley Oval can have a terrific atmosphere.
Do you think,
And I
sorry to
think,
interrupt, we'll run out of questions if we focus in so much on this one, but do you not think Test match cricket may have become a product for TV a little bit more? Would you go and sit and watch a whole day of Test match cricket, or sit at home and watch,
sure, it has become more of a televised product, but I don't think there's a future for a game with nobody watching in the ground. Just the spectacle of professional players playing and nobody in the ground. I don't see that as sustainable. So I hope in 20 years' time, even if they're smaller, more boutique grounds and smaller capacities, I hope we see a lively crowd at the game. In terms of inviting somebody connected with the game on, I think I'd invite Harold Larwood on, the great working class hero, fast bowler, and to chat to him about Bodyline and Bradman, and that was still the most controversial series of all time.
One thing
and
I
it
was
lies.
certain about when I saw this question was that you would invite someone slightly further back in time than me. You are more of a historian of the game than I am. So, right, on to question two. It's a long question, this. Hello, fellas. The first team captain of Sowerby Bridge Cricket Club in the Halifax Cricket League in West Yorkshire. My question relates to grassroots cricket. Are you concerned by the participation levels dropping off over the last 10 years, especially in junior cricket, and what can be done to encourage youngsters to play the game? In my club, me and a handful of others were the last young players to come through the junior sides and be regular with first team players. That was 14 years ago.
I suspect it's a varied picture as you go around the country. Sowerbridge in the Halifax League, I don't know. Obviously, I do know about the two clubs I've been connected with. Woodhouses up in Manchester, North Manchester, where I'm from, and then down in Radlett Cricket Club, where I live now. And I think, I mean, participation levels have dropped. I think I don't have the figures to hand, but I think that would be the case for all team sports, bar football, probably, which is, the outlier for every sport. But, as people have got more into, I don't know, cycling or going to the gym, individual pursuits, generally team sports across the board have declined a little bit. But actually, the two clubs that I'm connected with, they're quite in buoyant health. There's good numbers of juniors that turn up on a Sunday morning to my local club, still puts out 4 teams. And same with Woodhouses in North Manchester. I think the biggest issue is the kind of narrowing or the contraction of the social class from which young cricketers are coming through from. So, much more public school, private school based than it used to be. When I was a kid in my junior school in Manchester, for example, the Manchester Education Authority put on free coaching. Former Lancashire cricketer Roy Collins, you could go and get free coaching in the indoor school at Withington. And those kind of things don't exist so much now. So the production of players is becoming more privatized, and it's an expensive game to watch and an expensive game to play. And of course, as the game becomes more privatized, as these franchises go into private hands, I can only see those trends accelerating. So don't know about Sowerby Bridge, but hope that they can get better numbers or more numbers coming through. And
Yeah, I
your
agree with
local club, Hutton?
Yeah, Hutton Cricket Club. My boys play there. My daughter played there. It is in good health, actually, the Essex League, from what I see, and the numbers are decent. Obviously, you know, uh, things like Chance to Shine and the 100 and various things are trying to grow grassroots cricket. And there are numbers of girls and boys that come in every day, every week. But you then need more facilities. One thing I always find that could be done is the timings and the lengths of games. My daughter, for example, gave up cricket simply because it took too long. She was playing uh, quick cricket, then 20 over cricket, and then suddenly all day on a Sunday to go and play a game of cricket. I think the youngsters of today don't want to give up their whole days. There are, like my brother's over 60s. He plays England over 60s. I think your brother does as well. And there are those that absolutely it's in their blood, and they would play if it was a 2-day, 5-day club game, they would play it. But there are others who just want it for the social side, and it can be a little bit of a long game. So just to mix up the Saturday, Sundays with a few 20 over games, a few evening games, music on, a bit of fun. That will bring a bit of finances as well. Finances in the club are a nightmare, rely heavily on bar takings and things like that. So it is not easy. It is dwindling, but hopefully we've both played club cricket and enjoyed it and loved it. I know my lad does. He's started nets, Monday night nets last night. So let's hope club cricket continues.
How many sixes would Athers have hit in his international matches, if his international matches had coincided with the modern era? And would he have politely opted out of T20
Wasn't
cricket?
the era. I'm not sure the era was the problem. It was your lack of hitting ability, surely. How many did you hit?
Well, I asked Benedict this last year because it cropped up, and I think he came up with the answer 4 or 5, but one of them might have been an all-run 6. or
There's
2
no
before
way.
overthrows.
There's no way Glassback Atherton is running a 6. I mean, you'd have to be stretchered
I
off after that.
we always get this question about contrasting over eras, though. How do you kind of, compare or contrast down the eras? My rule of thumb, which is a good rule of thumb because it can never be disproven, is if you're a good player in one era, you'd be a good player in another era. And if you're a great player in one era, you'd be a great player in another era. And nobody can disprove that. So I'll stick with that theory. But as you know, when we were growing up, all the emphasis was around defense and staying in and protecting your wicket. And that's flipped. That's changed. Every young cricketer now is in the gym pushing weights, trying to hit sixes, trying to get a franchise contract. So if we were young kids of 20 now, we'd be doing exactly the same thing. We'd be very different players. I'm not saying, how many sixes I would have hit, but just that you'd be a different player because of the
Yeah.
incentives, because of the way the game has gone. And because of the role models that you see batting now, young Sam Constas, all these young kids in Australia are going to watch somebody like that and are going to kind of ape and copy what they do. So it is just a different time. Simple as that.
Yeah, I'm not as much of an old fogey in my day as you are, so I look at it and think, wow. The two things I think that are absolutely have gone through the roof exponentially is the hitting potential. They hit sixes. A six used to be an event, especially in my life or your life. It is not an event anymore. They just hit sixes for fun, and maybe a consequence of that, the fielding on the boundary, some
But
of the
that's
catching.
because of how the game has gone. And, a
Yeah,
player of 30, 40, 50 years ago, you know, given the environment of today and all the kind of, the bats, the hitting potential, the weights and the
gym
gym,
work.
that's just
Yeah.
that's how it is. That's just what people would do in this day and age.
Right, moving on. If the Sky Cricket podcast was around in your playing days, who would you have liked to see as the host?
Well, I suppose two of the guys that we worked with a long time, who are not working for Sky now, but Bobby would have been a classic. He would have probably libeled or defamed himself out of existence because, because he was very unspoken, but great man. And I think the podcast format would have suited him down to the ground. And I'd quite like to have seen Beefy try and tackle the technological side of things. You know, I would have Beefy and Bob probably as the podcast hosts from 10 or 15 years ago.
They were the two that straight away came to mind for me. I mean, Bob, we are so sort of diplomatic about certain players' performance on tours and whatever, and how did they go in Australia? Wasn't it Bob that gave Chris Wokes 0 out of 10 on one
Not out
tour?
of 10.
And
You
had to
usually get
write him a
one for turning up.
Yeah, he had to write him a letter of apology or something. So definitely Bob, and it would be Bob on his own, as you say, because Beefy was still trying to be log in now.
What would you do with Zach Crawley? Back his technique to be successful in Australia, more bounce, faster pitches, less swing, or make the change now? If so, who comes in? We had a lot of questions about Zach Crawley, so we just chose one, but there were quite a few about his place in the side.
Yeah, I think now you would have to stick with him. Simple. I never like to say it like that, almost like, oh, go on then, stick with him. But the two sides recently that he's done well against are India and Australia. And they are the two. We have Zimbabwe coming up, and then the two massive series, India at home, Australia away. And his record recently is pretty good against them. And you'd think his game will come on to Aussies and Ashes away, but you'd think his game, depending on conditions, would be suited to Australia. He plays the ball above his waist well. He goes at the ball hard, which on good Aussie pitches you can do. My only concern is about Zach Crawley himself. I mean, I've heard various members of the team and coaching staff talk about this high ceiling, and they use him as an example. I don't see it averaging 30 as a high ceiling. I just don't see that. Averaging 40 is a high ceiling, or 50 if you're Kumar Sangakkara or some of the greats. So the question is for Zach himself. Does he want to end his career? He's played 53, 54 test matches now. Does he want to end his test match career, having played 60, 70 test matches and averaging 31 and think, well, that's what the player I was, because he only averages 31 in first-class cricket. Or does he want to have a look at himself and go, do you know what? I'm a little bit better than that. Yeah, they want me to set the tone. Yeah, they want me to hit the first ball of the Ashes for 4, but am I just a little bit better at that? Can I improve my game? You know, Matt Henry's all over me like a rash. What can I do to see off Matt Henry? I think it's got to come from Zach himself, because at the moment, like I say, he averages 31 in first-class cricket and 30 in Test match cricket. That's not a high ceiling. They have shown a lot of faith in him. I think it's about time Zach owned his game and said, I am better than this, and I'm going to show people, because he did for a while, didn't he? That little period of a year, we had him on the pod at Old Trafford, and he was in great spirits. We were talking about the Twitter feed. What is Zach Crawley doing now? And things like that. And he played well. Him and Duckett were finding a really good combination. He needs to go back to that Zach Crawley.
Yeah, the question is stick or twist, really. And they're kind of so all in with him now. And there are only 5-6 tests before the Ashes begins. And there's going to be precious little first-class cricket beyond that, because after the 5 tests against India, you've got, the 100, and then there's the white ball end to the English season, and then England go to New Zealand for white ball cricket. So you've got minimal. If they wanted to make a change now, I think it's kind of too late for them. So that's why they're going to stick with him, and I think that's probably fair enough, given that how much they've backed him, as you say, and they've been backing him with the Ashes in mind. The problem will come is if he has another really bad series against India, because I was in New Zealand. We talked about this briefly on an earlier podcast. He looked at the end of his tether at the end of that series when Matt Henry got him out for the 6th time. Now, if, he has a similar spell over 5 tests, that average would come down. How mentally would he be feeling? So there's a lot riding on it, because they want him at the top of the order with Duckett. They want him to go to Australia. They feel he's got the game there. And I think they will stick with him come what may now. But he needs to have a good series against India so that he can go into that tour with some confidence and kind of some peace of mind, really. Because, as I say, he looked a little bit at the end of his tether.
I mean, I will say, when you spoke about it to Graham Smith the other day, and I was going to ask you the question, because I looked at my screen and we had Smith and Atherton, 2 very fine opening batters. I will say, I was looking at a list of averages in the last 6 years, and the lowest ones, a lot of them are opening the batting. So I don't know if it's the ball doing more, the quality of the bowling, the batting, maybe with all the white ball cricket that we talk about, that it's not, the technique's not quite there. It looks like being an opener in recent times has not been an easy task. Right, on to the next question.
It's always been a difficult gig, Nass.
You made it look. You definitely made it look difficult. Standard square leg if you're a number 3 if Atherton's opening. Right, how much of a difference Brendan McCullum is going to make to this England limited overs side, which has been struggling for quite some time now? And do you think Buttler is still the right man to lead England, considering he has been out of touch for a while now?
Well, once after the World Cup in the Caribbean, they were always going to make a change, and it seems to me that the coach is always more expendable than the captain. So Matthew Mott gave way. I think it would have been wrong then to change both roles and give McCullum coming in, who knows Buttler well and seems to want to work with Buttler. That seems the obvious thing to do. If the Champions Trophy goes badly, that will be the 3rd ICC tournament that has gone badly for Jos Buttler, and that will be a difficult call then for Rob Key. The only thing is that the Champions Trophy is 3 games, isn't it?
Could
you're
be,
being
yeah.
judged on. Oh, it could be more than 3 games, but it might just be 3 games. It's a very quick in and out tournament, so it's not like a World Cup where you've got more evidence over a long period of time. The question around McCullum, I think, is fascinating. I'm not sure I would have gone down the route of giving McCullum the test matches and all the white ball stuff, because I think, although the schedule has eased and that was part of the rationale for it, there's very little like crossover now. One team won't be in, the 2 teams won't be operating at the same time on different continents, but it's still a pretty horrendous schedule for one guy to do it all. And my hope is that clearly there is no lessening of his impact on the Test match team, because obviously he's had a clear impact there in terms of results and style, and an uplift in the way people are feeling about England's Test team, and you just don't want that to be diluted, given the extent of his workload now. So it remains to be seen how it goes. Obviously, I hope it goes well, but I just think it is going to be a real challenge given the workload and schedule.
Yeah, I
And
agree
you?
with that. I mean, you're right. If there's one time to do it, it's this year, because especially at the start of the year, they haven't got that much Test match cricket. So McCullum, generally, wherever he goes, we saw that with the Test match side, has an instant impact. And I hope he has an instant impact with Butler and this team, because I think they're ranked 6th or 7th. And it's a big tournament, the Champions Trophy. They're in a tough group as well. We may come on to it, but they've got Australia, South Africa, and Afghanistan, and in those conditions, that is a tough group. So hopefully they will improve their performances. Next question. You're in charge.
Am I in charge? Okay.
Yeah.
What message does it send to county cricket? Interesting question. When England pluck guys from obscurity rather than selecting players on merit, Hull and Bethel picked with modest records, but players who perform season after season, i.e. Sam Cook, get overlooked. Good question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first thing is you can't argue with how well they've done with selection. I mean, you can argue maybe with results. They win 3, lose 3. They don't draw any games, and they're up and down. And if the conditions are good, they win. If they're not suited, they don't. But as far as selection and the people they've selected, and they have been really left field, not just a little bit left field. Bethel, without a first-class 100, comes in and bats at 3 in a Test match and looks to the manner born, looks the part. All of them, Jamie Smith or Gus Atkinson, the list is long of players that have come in and done well. Tom Hartley in India, Bashir, whatever. So, and the other thing I quite like about them is that they're consistent. I've been on selection meetings and where you just sort of sway with the wind, and you read what the papers are saying and who's the next kid off the block, and we'll go for them. And then you end up going round in circles. You have a policy, you have a belief, stick by it, and they have definitely done that. The one thing they may have to tweak is conditions in Australia. A lot of what they've done is about Australia. Make no mistake, this McCullum-Stokes key regime will be judged on that Ashes and to a degree India. Now, I don't know if you think, but the conditions in Australia historically have been pace. But actually, recently, you do need a bit of skill. And look at how Scott Boland has bowled. I noticed Sam Cook, for example, has got 4 this morning or overnight on the Lions trip with that newish Kookaburra ball or different Kookaburra ball. So whether they just have to reassess that actually we do need a Cook or a Wokes, an Anderson to sort of deliver in those sort of conditions. How do you think they've gone with selection?
Well, a lot of the ones they plucked out of obscurity, if you like, have gone well, haven't they? They've been amazing. Shoaib Bashir, Jacob Bethel, Tom Hartley in India. The thing is that when you are England captain or in managing director of cricket, as Rob Key is, or the England coach, you have a chance to do it your way for the short time in which you are in charge. And the worst thing would be to be just a kind of time server where nobody really knows what impact you've had. One thing you can say is that Key and his colleagues have got a clear vision, and they're backing their judgment, and I admire that in many ways. They're not time serving. They're saying we're going to try and change things quite dramatically. We're overlooking many of the performances in county cricket. We're backing our pathways of under-19s, Lions, England team, and we are not afraid to give players that we feel have a high potential. We're not afraid of backing them, and I admire that. And whilst you're in charge, you're allowed to do what go about it in the way that you want to go about it, and that's fine. I think the interesting bit of the question is about this kind of disconnect between county cricket and the England team. I think it is dangerous if you have a system that is totally disconnected. In Australia, the great advantage of it has been this almost clear pyramid path: grade cricket to state cricket to the international team. And I do think you need to have the different parts of the game feeling as though they're connected and moving together almost in the right direction. So that is an area that I think, you know, you need to be aware of. But in terms of picking their players, there are whilst they're in charge, they can pick who the hell they want, and they'll be judged on the results. And as you say, the results so far have been better than they were before.
Right. Next question. Nats Athers, big fan of your friendship, debatable, and humor. Nasser's humor. I think you forgot a word in there. Question. Did you both ever fall out? If so, why and when? I mean, I obviously got one, but
I don't think we've ever had a massive falling. I mean, you were not happy when we were bowled out for 46 in Trinidad, and I didn't
I
pick you
was the
for the
spare
next
batter.
game, and you were the spare batter. You made, as they say in politics, your feelings known, and you know it was a, I don't know, how do they do this, a robust conversation? That's what they'd call it, wouldn't it? But that
It
was fair
wasn't a
enough.
robust. No, it was not a robust conversation. You were bowled out for 46. So I literally went to get a roti in Trinidad, and I came back, and you were 8 down. I turn up to Barbados at the spare batter, and you've just been bowled out for 46. I walk on the field at Barbados and look at you and go, "What number do you want me to bat?" And you went, "You're not playing." That's not a robust conversation. I could not get into a side that was 46 all out.
Well, we've been through this selection for, you know, in the 90s, 80s, 90s of just revolving doors. I was keen to stick
Consistency.
with players through thick and thin, more thin than thick. Next
This
question.
winter, we nearly fell out when I left you in that restaurant in Pakistan.
Yeah, that wasn't a good moment. And occasionally your temper has got the worst of you. Like when we left you in Melbourne, 4 of us got into a car and went into the MCG, and you stormed into the commentary box and let us all have a serve.
The hardest ground in the world to get into. It's not like New Riddle Street, Chelmsford. You literally cannot get into that cricket ground without a car. Thanks. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's a couple. Right, your next question.
Who was the better player between the two of you?
You, definitely.
Well, the
Definitely you.
records are very similar, actually, both in first class and Test cricket. But it's a bit like gymnastics, isn't it? It's the degree of difficulty about where you play. I was an opener. You were, you
Not
know, in
long.
that warm blanket of the middle order. So I
Shane
think, as
Warne.
you
Shane
suggested,
Warne
all the
retirement.
openers are hard on openers at the moment. So you can kind of add 3 or 4 to your career average if you open the batting in Test cricket.
You were the better player. I think it's forgotten. It is forgotten. I don't like to say nice things about you, but it is forgotten about your toughness and how we did feel that brief moment that you were in the middle, gutsing it out. We as an England team felt much more confident and comfortable in the dressing room until you joined us a few deliveries later. Right, must be me next. Where are we up to?
The bookshelf. Well, it's a good job you're asking me this question because you've never read a book.
The bookshelf behind Nasser is third co-anchor of the show. I want to ask you both recommendations from some of the favorite books on cricket. Love you both, guys. Actually, I rearranged, when I say Karen rearranged the bookshelf over Christmas, and we got one comment in the YouTube comments the other day saying, "Nice work. We've got some plants, some potted plants in there, and there's been a rearrangement." The ones I've read are ones I need to do documentaries on. So I read this one, very good. The Story of Sri Lankan Cricket and Islands 11. That was that documentary I did.
You
Nicholas
actually
Brooks.
read that book?
I had to, because we did that doco on Sri Lanka. The KP doco, I had to read that work of fiction that was the KP doco. And I've got somewhere here, Sachin has sent me a signed book as well. The greatest batter I ever
big
saw.
long thing.
Yeah.
And not the most
Yeah.
interesting read either.
No.
I am going to recommend a few books. Anything by Gideon Haigh on cricket, fantastic. I'd pick out Stroke of Genius and Mystery Spinner. Duncan Hamilton's biography of Harold Larwood is an absolute cracker. I really enjoyed Simon Hughes's A Lot of Hard Yakka, which was a very funny take on county cricket of the 80s. But so many great books. There's a fantastic literature, really, history of cricketing literature.
What was your book called? They always have funny titles. Mine was Playing, I'm going to give it a plug, Playing with Fire.
Opening up
or
something. Shocking kind of
opening up. Great. Right.
Nass, you always said the key to winning in Australia is having an attack that can take 20 wickets per game. Do England have an attack that can do that this winter?
Well, that comment was made. I mean, you obviously have to take 20 wickets to win any game, but was more about the conditions that our era and after our era faced, where the Kookaburra ball, flat pitches, hot, big grounds, and you don't need medium dobbers. You need extra pace, and you need people who get a bit of bounce and turn with the ball. And that's why we struggle. We sometimes didn't have enough. We had some. We had enough of that. We didn't have enough of that. So but recently, just watching, like I say, actually the ball seems to have done more than new Kookaburra ball. So whether that brings England into it, definitely brings their bowlers into it with Atkinson, Carse, Potts, Wokes. They have got a crop of bowlers in there that definitely, they've gone early with Broad retired, then Atkinson, then Anderson retired. Or was retired, and they've made the shift early to get these lads with overs under their belt, and they are performing. They look a useful attack. So it really depends on what conditions are like in Australia. Bashir still has some room for improvement with the control of his length. If you compare him with maybe Nathan Lyon, it's an unfair comparison, but if it does get flat, then Nathan Lyon at this stage is going to outbowl Shoaib Bashir. So I'm pleased Bashir's on the Lions trip because he needs to keep bowling more and more and keep improving. So I think they've got a good balance to the bowl. Like 2010-11, I thought they had a real good balance. The height of Tremlett, the skill of Bresnan, Anderson, Swan, Broad. They had a lot of useful balanced side there. So long waffly answer, but it's gone in the right direction. They've made the change early.
Mm-hmm. Fitness dependent as well, isn't it? If
And
Tong's
Stokes
there,
obviously as well,
yeah,
and a crop of them. You've also got Wood and Archer, possibly. That's where your pace comes from. So they've got a crop of them. They'll need them definitely in Australia.
Yeah, I think if they're all fit, then they've definitely got an attack that can take 20 wickets there. But it's a big if.
Right, let's
Your
go.
question.
If you guys were to play Bumrah, how would you try to tackle him? And if you were captaining against him, what message would you send to the team in order to nullify him to a certain extent?
Well, just glad he wasn't in my era. He looks a nightmare to face. I always feel that the bowlers who have got slightly unusual actions are the hardest. Some of the quickest bowlers that I face, bowlers like Alan Donald and Brett Lee, had beautiful actions, and you could kind of, although they were unbelievably quick, you kind of got a clear sight of the ball, and you could almost regulate your own trigger movements and your rhythm. I think with Bumrah that would be very difficult. Most batters these days have trigger movements, those kind of pre-movements before the ball is bowled. But how do your timing of your movement to Bumrah seems to me to be very awkward, because he has that stuttering, stammering run up, and then all of a sudden as a thunderbolt comes down, and as we know, he releases the ball a bit closer to the batter with that snap of the wrist and hyperextension of the elbow. So he looks a very difficult bowler to face to me. I'm glad I don't have to do it. Don't really have any advice to how you would do it other than find a way. Batting is about finding a way in conditions against whichever bowlers you come up against. You've got to find a way.
Second part of that question I find interesting. How as a captain would you have team
Mm.
orders for him? It was funny, wasn't it? In all our meetings, we would have meetings about the opposition batters. Where are you going to bowl to Ricky Ponting? Where are you going to bowl to Brian Lara? We'd never really have meetings about how you're going to nullify Courtney Walsh or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like left to the batters to individually work out a plan. I think the one time I heard it happen was that New Zealand played Australia, and Stephen Fleming, being the brilliant captain that he was, not told his team, but advised his team that we're going to sit on McGrath in Australia because a lot of the deliveries he bowls is not hitting the stumps. You can leave him well and it frustrates him, and maybe go after Warne like Peterson did in the 2005 Ashes or whatever. And that puts Australia under pressure. So it's something generally, I don't know that nowadays they may do, but generally in our era, we didn't talk about the team plans for opposition bowlers that much. They were mentioned, obviously.
Hi, Nasser and Athers. Who are some of the young talent that you can see coming through in English cricket that will become world class? Lots being made of Archie Vaughan at the moment. Archie's just been, Michael's lad, of course, has just been given the honour of captain in the England under-19s team. in their next
Well,
engagement. But the Lions are in Australia, aren't they? And that's
yeah,
usually a key indicator.
yeah. Listen, I'm not the world class. I'm not one to build any of them up really at this stage, and some of them are very, very inexperienced, as you say there. With Archie Vaughan, I think he's played 4 first class games. Rocky Flintoff, mentioned he's played
Yeah.
4 first class games. The one's obvious. I think Jacob Bell, real talent. His stock in the last 3 months has gone through the roof, hasn't it? He went from playing a bit for Warwickshire and 100 franchise to everything now, all formats and all virtually every franchise wants him. I quite like James Rue at Somerset. I've seen him bat a bit. I saw him play in that semi-final. I wasn't there that day. Last semi-final against Surrey in a high pressurized situation and delivered. Seen him in county championship on the stream. He looks like he's got a really organised but very modern game. Who have you seen? You've been around the traps a bit more because obviously Josh plays at that level and has played more age group cricket. Who have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I keep my eye on the Lions because, as I mentioned earlier, they're kind of almost skirting around some of the performances in county cricket. They're going very much under 19s Lions main team, fast tracking these people. So the Lions is interesting at the moment. Rocky Flintoff is there. Tom Laws I like at Surrey. Ben McKinney, the opener, young opener up at Durham, Hamza Sheikh. Keep an eye on Mitch Stanley. I think Lancashire, Durham to Worcestershire to Lancashire, tall, fast bowler. They're obviously looking for bowlers of a certain type to fast track, and he may be one they got their eye on in
Right, this is
future.
a question I don't think you'd like because you hate like the sayings like the Fab Four or whatever. But I'm going to ask you, who are the next Fab Four?
Brooke, Jaiswal, Kamindu Mendis, and Rachin Ravindra. There's 4 for you.
Oh, I hadn't thought of a couple of those. I'm just going to have to rethink. I went Brooke Jaiswal. Now I went Saeem Ayub, who I think multi-format. Pakistan just had this injury. Don't know if he'll be fit for Champions Trophy, but I think he could be a real dynamic player for Pakistan in all formats at the top of the order. And what does Fab Four mean? Do they have to be young?
Well, you can't pick Steve Smith
Or can
or
I pick
Joe Root.
Travis Head?
No.
Why not? Because when Root said Harry Brook is the best player in the world at the moment, best batter, and I thought who would be upset with that comment, and who would think, hold on, I'd say
Well,
Travis Head would be.
how old is
So
Trav?
31. I've checked this when I knew I was coming on.
No, you can't have him then. Like the
All right.
next generation. Who's going to dominate the
Okay.
next
All right.
generation?
Okay. I come into Mendes and Ratchin. I'll give you that. I'll have to drop Travis Head for one of those two. But there are some very good young players. I think they have to be across formats. And I think all those players you mentioned there are across formats. So pretty good answers. Better answer from you than me. Sorry, Travis.
Early predictions for the men's and women's Ashes. Who do you think key players are from both sides, if there are, to return home with the urn? Lots of questions. We had lots of questions about the Ashes, which obviously continues to dominate.
Yeah, we touched on it last week, didn't we? We had England as favourites against India, and we said Australia favourites. Just history tells you that. Not just the England side, but any side going to Australia. India have done well up until the recent tour, but England in particular have a very poor record, including our era, especially our era in Australia. Here in England, actually, it's very close, but in Australia, so like I said earlier, everything is geared towards that. This whole regime is going to be judged. I think it'll be a fascinating series. I still think their bowling lineup is strong, and it's whether they've made the change to the batters like Constas and Webster and the changes they make. If they've made them early enough to give them time to bed in before the Ashes, we will see. It'll be a fascinating series. As far as the women goes, we touched on it. I think Australia women just have more depth to their cricket, and I see them as firm favourites.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. England's women are up against it in the Ashes, but relatively optimistic about about the men's chances in a year's time. Do you think there's a chance for Johnny Bairstow to make it into the England squad again in any format? I think
No,
England have moved
no.
on, so
I think they've moved
a
on.
fairly brief answer to that.
Once they move on, they move on, this squad. So no, I don't think so. Very fine player, Johnny, but I don't think so. Who, according to you, and that's the next our gig, we got our schedule through the other day. We're both starting in Dubai, aren't we? England, no, India, Bangladesh, isn't it? So yeah. Who do you think will win the Champions Trophy this year? Lots of questions are in on this, actually. Didn't need to read that bit out. That's just a bracket from our
with the question.
from our production coordinator. She just put a
from
bracket
our
on that.
production coordinator.
What's the question good on that?
I'm going to go for South Africa, like I do with every global tournament, until they actually win one, when I can finally say that this stocked clock, has been right at last. So yeah, South Africa, they look a strong side. I think it's time that they broke their duck in ICC event.
I just remember in Barbados, we were sat in what they call the green room next to the commentary room, and you had that smug look on your face when they needed 30 off 30 with however many wickets in hand, and that sort of grin was slowly wiped off your face when India got over the line. I'm going to go Australia. I mean, they've just won virtually everything else. They didn't win the World T20. India did, but I'm going to go Australia. They're ranked number one. I'm going again, a repeat of the World Cup final. I'm going India, Australia final.
Whose question is it?
Yours. I just read the last one out badly because I included the bracket bit.
If a two-tiered test system is implemented, which group would England be in?
I don't know what their ranking is at the moment. 6th
Low.
or 7th? Well, the World Test Championship, they're mid-table.
In a relegation dogfight.
They're sort of Crystal Palace or somewhere down there, aren't they? I think they would. Yeah, I mean and that's the interesting thing about the two-tiered system and 2 divisions or whatever. They suddenly have a bad year. They go into Division 2 and you don't have an Ashes, or do you suddenly have an Ashes? That's one of the failings of that system. But hopefully they'll be up towards the top. But no one has I hate the sort of big 3. You know, it's not finances; it's what you do on the cricket field that counts. I know they're linked, but no one has a divine right to be in Div 1 or Div 2. That your results.
And if you've been around as long as we have, you know that times change. When we started playing, West Indies were the absolute top dogs. We went through a period in the 90s when Pakistan, arguably in that early 90s period with Waz, Waqar and Mushtaq, you know, arguably the best side. And things change. You can't just, you know, just because India or Australia at the moment are the top dogs, that may not be the case forevermore.
We certainly wouldn't have been in Tier 1 or Div 1. We would have looking down at the sort of Isthmian League or whatever, you know, that direction we'd be looking down in. So, right, okay, we're nearly done here. This is a good one for you because you're always writing about it in your Times piece. Do Sky mandate you don't criticize the 100?
Oh, you've engineered this so that you've asked the question to me on this one.
No, we just did it in order. That's
well, it's a good question because we get this a lot. Actually, I find the 100 a bit like Brexit or something. You know, it absolutely splits opinion. People love it or loathe it, and not much in between. Whereas I find, first of all, Sky have never said that you can't criticize the 100. They never tell us what to say. We just give our own opinions as we think. But I find that with the 100, my views are a bit more nuanced. I like some bits of it, and I haven't liked other bits of it. So I find myself occasionally criticizing, at which point you're damned by those who love it as a dinosaur. And I find myself occasionally praising it, at which point you are damned by those who loathe it as a kind of company man. But I do have a nuanced opinion on it. You know, there's elements that I think have been really good of the 100. You know, what it's done for women's cricket is fantastic. It's elevated women's cricket unbelievably. And I think it was absolutely inevitable that the ECB would try and find a way of getting private money into the game, to have a franchised short form competition. Because in the global war on talent, if you want to call it that, if other competitions are able to offer players the amounts of money that we see knocking around, you have to be able to compete with that. So I thought it was absolutely inevitable, and I like the concept of a condensed competition that is best v best, or supposedly best v best. So I like all those elements of it, but there's elements that I haven't particularly enjoyed. It's really impacted upon the schedule and made the schedule in English cricket, even more kind of crowded and difficult to understand. Some of the language around it is a bit disingenuous. It's as though sometimes, women and children have never been to cricket before, which clearly is not the case. But, if you give a tournament the advantages that the 100 has had by putting it on in August, in summer holidays and cheap tickets and what have you, clearly you're going to funnel greater numbers of families towards the competition. So, yeah, as I say, I have a nuanced view of it. But to go back to the question, call it as we see it, and we will have our different opinions on it, which I think is the beauty of the coverage. People will have different opinions, and I try and give mine as best I can, but we're never told what to say or what to think.
I'm glad you got all of that off your chest, to be honest. So I agree. We have never in my 20 years or whatever at Sky have ever been told in any way, say this, don't say this. The best thing about working for Sky, you look at Mikey Holding when T20 cricket came up, he just went, I'm having nothing to do with that. Put a bowling machine up. I am not interested. And he, being the stubborn man that he is, he has stuck to that. I try and call it as I see it. There's parts of it that I really enjoy. And you're right. I mean, if you put it in the middle of summer and you reduce ticket prices, you will get families in. But there is definitely a lovely family feel of 100 game from the afternoon game to the evening game. There's a real good feel of it. Some of the games at the Oval have just been a magnificent, magnificent arena, really, where people are enjoying the cricket. There are other bits that you have to listen to your viewer, the graphics, for example. Viewers don't particularly like the graphics, and sometimes they are confusing. You'll have a team playing in one color and you'll have the graphics in a different color of the names. And I think Sky and the graphics people are trying to work on that. The things you'll say because the ECB have sent you, beforehand in a meeting, the ECB will say, oh, the game at Old Trafford sold out, and you'll rock up and you say, oh, it's a sellout today. And then you'll get to 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and it's not quite a sellout. So just call it honestly and truthfully. The sides, I do believe it does need, private equity to come in just to get the money to get the better players. When I look at the sides, if I look at an IPL or look at SA20 and how well they've done, and you look at the sides, you go, wow. When I look at 100 sides, I'm sort of going, we're taking a lot out of the English game here, and we're just improving the sides a little bit. For everything the 100 does, it needs to be a lot better, not just a little bit better. For all the schedule problems and all the stuff you talk about, it needs to be a lot better, not a little bit better. And at the moment, it's not a lot better. That might change. Can I just ask one question about the 100 to you? If, as it looks likely, a lot of money comes in for these 100 sides and saves various counties and saves the English game, has it worked? Is it worthwhile?
Well, I'd go back to what I said earlier, that I thought it was absolutely inevitable in the current environment, given the way the game has gone and where the game is going, that the ECB had to look to, bring in its own franchised competition enable it to compete. If you've got Major League Cricket in the summer, PSL, IPL, and they're all offering these players amounts of money, you have to be able to compete with that. And clearly, the only way the private money can come in is through entities that are not member owned, and that really is the whole point of the 100. Again, I talk about some of the disingenuousness about the language. That was the point of it. In my view, in order to get private money in, and And in fact, it links to the final question on here: thoughts on the privatisation of county cricket, e.g., the sale of Hampshire to the GMR Group, selling of the 100 franchises. Where does this leave the domestic game in England? In about 2-3 weeks' time, towards the end of January, the franchises will be down to their final 2 or 3 bids, and I think we'll get a sense of how much money is coming in after that. And I think my guess is that it'll surprise on the upside. I think there'll be more than may have been imagined previously. But clearly, then what happens after that down the line, long term, is much more uncertain. We talked about it last week, whether these two systems, one based on members clubs, first class cricket at the heart of it, can survive alongside a growing and expanding franchise privatized league, is very uncertain. I just don't know how that's going to play out eventually. But
one thing is for certain is that the English game does need the money, because the finances in county cricket. It's ironic, really, that the county members and county cricket have not particularly liked the 100, but it may be the thing that keeps them afloat and keeps them surviving. Now, I'm not just talking about the smaller clubs like mine at Essex. I know they're in a very difficult place financially, but even some of the bigger test match clubs are in huge debt that need paying off. And this money, and you're right, it needs to be spent wisely, because it's a one hit. You're not going to get it again. So the only thing I'd say is, are they coming in to buy the 100 and being a bit deep and meaningful here? Or are they buying a piece of English cricket? Are they buying a piece of Lords and buying a piece of Oval? These iconic cricket grounds, they're buying a bit of English cricket. That the tournament could have been anything. And these outside bidders have seen, right, there's English cricket, and we see the crowds and we see these great venues. We want a bit of that. Whatever the reason, I think the money is needed.
And that will be a focus of one of our podcasts, I'm sure, down the line, because as I mentioned, I think, the last week of January is the date whereby these franchises will get down to their last 2 or 3 bidders. News will filter out after that, who they are, and be a combination of IPL franchises, private equity, maybe other wealthy individuals, and how much money has been raised. So maybe that will be something for the end of January. But we got through.
I'm in the lakes. I'm in the lakes end of Jan. I'm in Ullswater. So
Really?
it may have to be Beefy, Bob, or Shane. Good luck getting hold of those
in
three.
Ullswater in January. How long are you up for?
I have no say in this, by the way.
Ah.
I'm going up on Ullswater end of January. We enjoy the lakes, actually. I know you go walking in the lakes, but that's in your summer holiday that you get from
I'm
Sky.
I'm there in April, actually, early April.
Right.
Ambleside.
So I might have to do it from there.
Cool. Well, that was enjoyable. Thanks to all our viewers for sending in the questions. We'll probably do this intermittently, maybe once a year.
Once every 2 years, maybe.
Nas, I'll speak to you next week. Go on.